Plot armor. It's a term that you often hear brought up these days when people talk about works of fiction. And it's a very, very common criticism leveled against both good and not so good shows, movies, books, etc. But what if the concept of plot armor, at least as many understand it, was actually a myth? I'd suggest making a drinking game where you take a shot each time I say plot armor in this video, but that might be dangerous. So on second thought, don't do that, please. This week's video is brought to you by my upcoming original manga, Amaranth Angels. Cute anime girls, starfighters, and exciting space battles in a fun space adventure. Written by Girls on Panzer fan, for other fans of Girls on Panzer and the military mori genre in general. The first full volume will be out in 2025, and then I'll have a pre-order store live for anyone who missed the Kickstarter campaign. Now, on to the video. So now that I got your attention with the video's title and the intro, we could probably talk, maybe rant would be a better descriptor, about the concept of plot armor. And while the video title is, indeed, slightly hyperbolic, I do still stand by the fact that plot armor is, very much of the time, if not most of the time, a myth. At least in terms of how many people are using it. Or, depending on how you look at it, plot armor is both a myth and present in pretty much every single work of fiction that exists. Of course, we can't properly discuss something without understanding what it is, or at least what it technically is. Luckily for us, plot armor does have an official definition. Namely, the phenomenon in fiction whereby the main character is allowed to survive dangerous situations because they are needed for the plot to continue. While it is somehow in the Oxford Dictionary, the term plot armor to me really is more of a slang term, and based on what I see all the time online with people talking about various works of fiction, it's pretty much always used in a negative, dismissive way. The problem is, the way in which plot armor is pejoratively used so often is just wrong, and why I consider the concept to be largely a myth. The term plot armor is used in reference to pretty much every fictional franchise. But given that my primary focus on this channel is Girls on Panzer, and that the live-action show I most recently watched and enjoyed was Cobra Kai Season 6, I'll draw some examples from both of these shows of people nonsensically screaming plot armor. For the Girls on Panzer example, I've seen more than once people go something like, Miho and Oroai won because of plot armor. And for a more recent Cobra Kai example, Robbie beat Miguel in Season 6 because of plot armor. There are a couple of reasons why the alleged plot armor in both these scenarios is a myth. The first and foremost to me comes down to simply understanding what type of show, movie, book, etc. you're watching or reading. If you're watching a sports show, as both Girls on Panzer and Cobra Kai are in essence, part of the inherent genre, and why people enjoy them, is to see likable characters succeed, even when the odds are stacked against them. Which is why in the vast majority of sports fiction, the main character / main character's team will win when it matters most, against opposition challenging enough that said victory seemed unlikely. That's what the target audience expects, what it wants. So why would you go watch a sports show, then scoff at the main character winning against the odds? That's kind of the whole point. Same deal for a superhero story. The expectation and what the audience wants, the vast majority of the time, is to see the hero win, despite powerful opponents. Does that mean that the hero only succeeds then because of plot armor? In a technical sense, yes, I guess, based on the term's definition. But then without that, you don't have the genre, let alone the story. I can go into examples of other related genres as well, but I think you get my point. Plot armor, or rather, the main character surviving or succeeding by virtue of being the main character, is technically always there, even in shows with frequent character deaths, since, up until that time of death arrives, everybody technically has plot armor. But at the same time, the pejorative concept of plot armor simply does not exist. Another aspect of what makes what many call plot armor a myth can be seen in action or war movies, both those based on reality or the entirely fictional ones, with one character or another, often but not always the protagonist, surviving a battle scene that sees tons of other, unnamed characters die. They survive just because of plot armor, some scoff. In reality, they probably would have died 5 minutes in. Have you looked into real-life war stories? The types of improbable victories, the survival despite massive odds of death, that really happened would make what we see in most fictional content seem like nothing in comparison. So many tiny, seemingly coincidental things in reality can make all the difference in the world. The American bombers finding a Japanese ship to follow to the carriers at the last minute during the Battle of Midway. Taffy 3 somehow standing their ground and getting the Japanese to withdraw at the Battle of Samar. Audie Murphy surviving the war at all. Just imagine if those were fictional stories instead of real ones. So many people would just call that plot armor, enabling the author's desired outcome to happen. While yes, the odds of any one random soldier in a battle like D-Day at Omaha Beach may have been more likely to die than survive, Soldiers managing to survive close calls despite the chaos is eminently realistic, if that's what you're concerned about. Far, far more unlikely things have happened in real life than in fiction, which means that when fiction takes inspiration from that, not only is it not unrealistic, it is completely realistic. So any complaint about alleged plot armor due to quote-unquote realism also really holds no water, though there of course is a caveat here. Now, I did say earlier that plot armor, as most seem to use and understand the term, is only mostly a myth. And indeed, there are scenes in fiction, such as the big battle against the White Walkers in Game of Thrones, where characters do definitely survive due to blatant, bad plot armor. But the thing here is that that's simply bad writing, and or bad cinematography and editing. Showing a character, especially one known to not be a particularly great fighter, swarmed by zombies only for them to somehow have escaped unharmed off screen, now that is plot armor. The writers and or filmmakers being bad and writing someone not meant to die into a corner they shouldn't have been able to escape from, but having them do so regardless. The same thing goes for a character, for sake of example a normal human, for example surviving uninjured from a fall that should have at least done some noteworthy damage. So really, as is usually the case, the only quote-unquote problem is bad writing when it comes to characters doing things and surviving situations that truly don't make sense in universe. Samuel Tarly, as the show has presented him, should not have survived this, for example. However, at the same time, many people really are just too quick to criticize without thinking things through. What many dismissively or derisively call plot armor is, far from being a point from which to criticize a story, it's a necessity that makes perfect sense within the story. Why did the main character survive the big battle? Plot armor? No, it's because he's the main character. There simply isn't a story if the main character gets shot and killed 10 seconds in. Just like the D-Day stories we have are of the soldiers who survived, just to use one historical example. And in a sports show like Girls and Panzer specifically, the underdog team winning is just an inherent part of the vast majority of sports stories. Of course Miho and Ora are going to win, but they're not arbitrarily winning solely because it's what the story needs. We see how the battles play out, how their skills, and at times the mistakes of their opponents, lead to those victories. What's important is that the writing, whether of a book, comic, TV show, or movie, makes the victories and or the survival of key characters both believable within the setting and also satisfying, as without tension you get a boring story. Yes, the new quote-unquote villain fighters in Cobra Kai, for example, look extremely dangerous and intimidating, and you wonder how the main characters could beat them, which they have to, because if they didn't, it wouldn't be a credible threat and there'd be no tension leading in to seeing our familiar heroes go up against them. But the problem is, some people get it into their heads, for one reason or another, that suddenly these new characters are, quote-unquote, too good for the main characters to beat. And let's complain about, quote-unquote, plot armor later on, forgetting the point of the type of show that they're watching, and ignoring the fact that the main characters, when they do win, do so in a believable way. So really, in the end for me, the term plot armor is pretty meaningless, since every story technically has something one would call plot armor, which makes its common use as a term of criticism meaningless. After all, every single thing that happens in a story is necessary for the plot and story to progress, and is included by the creator for that reason. So why single it out only at certain points? A lot of this probably comes back to a topic that's too big for this video, mainly that we're in an era where people often just look for things to criticize, when in reality there's nothing wrong at all. And it honestly impacts the people who resort to that the most, since it makes it harder for them to enjoy quality content. So I would both ask and advise those people to both understand what sort of entertainment they're consuming and what that genre entails before complaining about some nebulous plot armor. And to my fellow writers out there, as always, we need to take care as we craft our stories to maintain in-universe consistency, and to plan things well enough that we don't write characters into corners where the only way to get them out is to utilize actual plot armor that brings down the story, while not being afraid to let heroes be heroes and do heroic things against all odds, just because someone who doesn't know better will shout plot armor whenever the hero does something cool. I hope this wasn't too rambly or ranty, though I guess it really is in essence a bit of a rant, since it's gotten tiresome seeing plot armor constantly tossed around in reviews and commentary as a definitive pejorative term, when, most of the time, it's simply a piece of the story that works just fine, as intended. But I felt like it needed to be called out a little bit, since I think it has had an unhealthy effect on how we talk about works of fiction. So, plot armor. Simultaneously something that's always present and necessary in our stories, but also at the same time a myth. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and like to support me and what I do here, My books and light novels are all available on Amazon. And you can get early access to videos, sneak peeks, and updates on the upcoming military mori manga and other projects by subscribing over on Patreon. I also offer channel memberships now, which get you access to monthly, members-only watch-along streams, in which we're currently watching Space Battleship Yamato. And as always, if you have any thoughts on this video or is anything storytelling related you'd like me to talk about, definitely share them in the comment section below. I'd love to hear them, and while I might not get to respond to every comment, at least not in a timely manner, I can guarantee that I read each of them. And don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss any future uploads. That's all for now, so until next time.